Canada is cracking down on truckers. Russia has been imminently invading Ukraine for a week now, and people are finding out that words really do matter when it comes to the sacraments. We'll cover that and more on today's Crisis Weekly Wrap-Up. Today is February 18th, 2022, and I'm Eric Sammons. So the Canadian truckers still seem to be dominating the headlines this week. Earlier this week, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau instituted the Emergency Act, which basically gives them even more power than they already have over your lives to try to crush any type of dissent. And that's all this really is trying to crush dissent. I talked about this on my podcast early on the Crisis Point podcast earlier this week. So I encourage you to check that out to find out more about it. But it looks like they're beginning to do arrests. I was just earlier on social media, and there's some videos on there that the police are really starting to do arrests in Ottawa. They're trying to basically clear out the whole area. And whether or not they'll be successful, I think remains to be seen. I imagine they will be, at least temporarily. And I really think this is a big moment for the state of freedom in the world. I think Canada is a flashpoint, because if they're successful, if Justin Trudeau and his cronies are successful in crushing these truckers and taking their money from them and all those type of things, then other countries will realize, hey, we can do this too. However, if the Freedom Convoy is successful, if they are able to stand strong and eventually the government has to cave, then I think people around the world will realize we don't have to stand up. We don't have to stand back when the governments do this. We can stand up to them instead. So I would just encourage everybody to be praying for what's happening in Canada, pray for the Freedom Convoy, pray for a conversion of heart, people like Justin Trudeau and others like him who are trying to crush freedom up there. The other big news this week is Russia and Ukraine. And it seems like every day somebody is warning that Russia is about to imminently invade. Now, I will just admit my own view here, which is that I don't think Russia ever planned to invade. I still don't think they're planning to invade. I think this has been an effort of them to try to get the West on the negotiating table so they can get what they want, what Russia wants. They're no angels, but I also think that they don't plan to invade. Now, I have a whole podcast about this from January 25th that you can listen to, where I give my thoughts on this. But it does look like at some point, if they don't invade, if Russia does not invade, the West is going to have to stop saying that they're imminently going to invade, because they were saying it was going to be Wednesday, the 16th. Now they're saying it's going to probably be on Monday, the 21st, or maybe the 22nd. And eventually, you can't just keep saying that, because they're not. It's going to be shown that they're not invading. So another thing to pray for is pray for peace over there. Obviously, I'm not saying that it's impossible that Russia would invade. I just personally don't think that was ever the plan, was for them to invade. So we'll see what happens. In church news, the secular press got a hold of the fact that a priest resigned recently. He was based in Phoenix. I think he's not from America, though. I can't remember exactly the details of that part. But basically, he had invalidly baptized thousands of people. Essentially, sounds like everybody he's ever baptized in his priestly career has been invalid. Why? Because he said, we baptize you in the name of the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit, instead of I baptize you. And just about, I think it was 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, the CDF, the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith at the Vatican, declared that is actually an invalid formula. It invalidates the baptism. Because, why is that? Because when a priest or anybody baptizes somebody, it's actually Christ who's doing the baptism. It's Christ baptizing through the person, the minister of the baptism. And so when you say we baptize, you're essentially saying the community is baptizing instead of Christ is baptizing. That's why you say the word I. It's also why during confession, the priest says, I absolve you, instead of we absolve you or anything like that. Now, this is a complete mess. I mean, there's no other way to put it. And it's a complete mess because now we have thousands of people out there who thought they were baptized. They weren't able to receive confession. They weren't able to receive, they didn't receive communion. They received And I don't think they committed a sin in receiving communion because they didn't know. They had really no reason to think they weren't validly baptized. If they're priests, that means their ordination's invalid and all their confessions that they give are invalid. I mean, it's a complete mess. But the truth is, this was very foreseeable that something like this could happen, because over the past 50 years, people haven't cared about the liturgy, how it's celebrated. You see it in the Mass, most obviously. Your typical suburban Mass you go to, it's just a mess as far as they're not really being careful to follow the rubrics, to say the black and do the red, as they say. And so, of course, they're going to be doing this on every case. When you feel like, as a priest, you have the right to make changes to the liturgy, any change, even the smallest one, this is exactly the result that's going to happen, that they're going to change something that really matters. In this case, it matters. And I know for outside the Catholic world, and even some people inside the Catholic world, this seems so much like nitpicking and minutia. But what it really says is that words do matter. And the church has always believed that words do matter, that it matters that the way you say things, that how you say things does matter. And so, I mean, there's a lot of catechesis that has to go on. And I just think that so people can understand this. But ultimately, we just need to pray, my goodness, that there's not more of these cases out there, and that hopefully in the future, all these news stories will make sure it will keep priests in line to not only not change the words of baptism, but not change the words of any sacraments. I know a priest was telling me that he himself went to a priest for confession before he was priest, where the priest would say, "This priest absolves you in the name of the Father, absolves you, and in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit." A confession. And he basically just was like, "I can't go to this guy anymore." And he said, "Could you please say it correctly?" And he wouldn't, because it's not the priest who's absolving him. It's when he says "I," he's speaking in persona Christi as Christ. So we really, that's a terrible story. Like I said, it's a complete mess. Also in church news, Pope Francis has reorganized the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. And this got headlines, but ultimately it was a big nothing burger. So essentially it was like bureaucrat shuffling. People thought he was going to make a lot of people thought he was going to make a major revision, a major reform of how the CDF is structured. But essentially what he did was he just said, okay, the CDF is in charge of doctrinal matters and disciplinary matters. We're going to make that more formal by having a secretary archbishop over each of those sections. So there's a doctrinal section and there's a disciplinary section, and they do kind of different things. So they're still going to be within the Congregation of Doctrine and Faith, but they're going to be more separate organizationally. I don't think it's going to have a big impact. I could be wrong. I don't think that change is going to have a big impact going forward. I mean, the truth is the CDF has been pretty neutered for a long time. It's not like the church has been actively trying to take out heresy in that's going on. It's not like it's really, I mean, it's turned a blind eye to most of the heresy that's happened over the past 50, 60 years. So I don't see how this makes a big difference. There was one thing that was, I thought, a little bit interesting, is that it noted that the Anglican ordinariates, the personal ordinariates, which we've talked about, we've written about Crisis, and we had a podcast about that a few weeks ago, they were officially kind of put under the CDF. And previously, when they were organized first established in 2009, I think it was, they were under the CDF, but also under other diasteries. I'm not going to be able to say it, so I'm not going to try. And so they're putting other organizations within there for various matters, depending on what it was they wanted, what the issue was. But now they're completely under CDF. And so this is interesting because, of course, that means they're not under liturgy, under the Congregation for Divine Worship. And the Congregation for Divine, why this matters is the Congregation for Divine Worship, that's who's over implementing Traditionis Custodes, which is the motu proprio trying to restrict the Latin Mass. And one of the things about that motu proprio was that it said very clearly the Novus Ordo is the unique expression of the Roman Rite, and there really shouldn't be other forms. But the Anglican ordinariate, the ordinariate Mass, is another form. And so some people wonder, including myself, would they get cracked down on too? And so putting them under a CDF, does that mean it's less likely because it's a CDW that's really working against the Church Latin Mass? I hope so. I pray that they're not touched, that they're left alone. But I could very well see that some people at Rome start to look at the Anglican ordinariates as kind of secret traditionalists, people who are not completely on board with exactly what's going on in the church today. And so who knows, maybe that'll happen. Also, the church, the Pope made changes to canon law this week. He made a number of changes to different canon law, different canons in canon law. And a lot of them were geared towards a decentralization. Certain things that required Vatican approval for something now only require Vatican confirmation, which doesn't sound like that big a difference, but it is. For example, if two bishops wanted to set up an interdiocesan seminary between them, before you had to get approval from the Vatican to have that happen. Now you just need confirmation. Same with programs of priestly formation. Also, national conferences of Catholic bishops publishing catechisms now don't need approval from the Vatican, but only confirmation. Associations of consecrated virgins can be set up with only confirmation. Also, other laws, for example, allow religious superiors to dismiss members without approval of diocesan bishops or the Vatican. So you see that all these kind of are geared towards less centralization. Now, I think this is one of these things where good Catholics can disagree whether this is a good or bad thing. I personally think it's a good thing. I think there's been too much centralization at Rome that's developed over 100 years now. And I think that's caused a lot of problems that we have today. But at the same time, it can be problematic to be decentralized too. It's not like there's an easy solution to this, because if you're centralized, that means when anything bad happens at the top, it spreads to everywhere, and we see that, of course, what's going on with Pope Francis. But at the same time, if anything good is happening up top, it can spread everywhere as well. Likewise with decentralization, though, what decentralization does, I should say, is it basically makes it so that you won't necessarily have all the bad affect everybody, but you also won't have the good affect everybody. And I think in today's church, when, let's be honest, we have more bad than good when it comes to our leaders, I think it's probably good to be decentralized, because then hopefully diocesan bishops who are solid can do good things in their diocese and can build up good communities. But if they're constantly under the foot of Rome and they can't do anything without Rome's approval, then I think that'd be much less likely to happen. So that's we'll see if that really has any impact or not. Finally, Amazon's Tolkien series is in the news because they finally released a trailer at the Super Bowl. This is something that's been in development. I think it's 5 years now since Jeff Bezos bought out the rights to basically do it's basically the Silmarillion series. They're going to do that, put it into a TV series. It's called Rings of Power. And there's been a lot of rumors this is not going to be good. I mean, first of all, it's taken so long to do anything. They haven't really released what the plot is too much. Well, there was a Vanity Fair piece last week that talked about it. Then there was this trailer. And let's just say this looks like it's going to be a woke disaster. We had a great article by Ben Reinhardt on Wednesday, the 16th, talking about this. He really breaks it down. He's a professor of Christendom. He breaks down exactly what the concerns are. I mean, ultimately, the reason Catholics love the Lord of the Rings and all the Tolkien's works, because Tolkien was a great Catholic who his Catholicism was just imbibed in his books. And so anything that tries to take that away, really, I mean, honestly, Catholics get upset about it. You might think of us as a bunch of nerds, but we get upset about it. I mean, one of the things, for example, is they of course have to have diversity in casting. And I know in Hollywood, that's absolutely necessary. You just can't survive if you don't do that. But the fact is that the Lord of the Rings series, whole Middle Earth, this was Tolkien's early mythology of England, or at least of Northern Europe. And so the idea that all of a sudden you can just have a diversity you throw in there, because this is the world it reflects today. That's not the world, though, of Middle Earth. It doesn't reflect Middle Earth as it was written. It would be the same as if you took some African story and then tried to insert a bunch of Englishmen into it. Some African mythology, you try to put a bunch of white guys into it. That's not going to work either. And there's other things, like they have women dwarves, which, if you know anything about this series, the dwarves actually don't go out in public, and they have beards, and they don't have beards in this. There's a lot of problems with it. I would just recommend read this article by Ben Reinhardt at Crisis called Amazon's Tolkien. And it was, I think, from February 16th. And you'll find out more about what the disaster is going to be. It's coming out, I believe, in this fall. So we'll see how it does. We'll see how it actually is when it comes out. But I'm not holding out hope that's going to be anything other than a disaster. So, okay, well, I think that's it for today. Till next time, everybody. God love you.